Hi everyone. So today we're going to be talking about aliens because I like talking about aliens. And I like when people talk to me about aliens. And I just so happen to have alien UFO related tattoos, which tends to cause people to want to unsolicitedly tell me about their UFO experiences, which I am perfectly okay with because I like hearing people's crazy ass stories. Last year I was driving through middle of nowhere mountainous Blue Ridge area of Virginia and stopped at a gas station, and the clerk at the counter noticed my tattoos and he was like, "Hey, would you like to hear my UFO story?" I was like, "Yes, I would." This is the one I got here, right? See? The truth is out there. The UFO right there, right? It's a bit faded. It needs to be touched up. But yeah, so that tends to get people's attention. And then I got this guy right here. And this is my cosmic gentleman. So he knows his tattoos right off the bat. He says, "I'm super into that stuff. Can I tell you about my story?" Hell yes, you can tell me about your story. I would love to hear your story. Don't even bother with the people lined up behind me. Just tell me about it. So basically, he said that back in the early 90s, him and a bunch of friends were sitting on their front porch and they saw a bunch of twinkling lights in the sky that looked really unnatural. And they just so happened to also be drinking and getting high and whatever. So it's kind of like, all right, here we go. This is already off to a great start. And he was like, "Yeah, so we pull out the old camcorder and got video of these lights doing all sorts of crazy stuff in the sky, and it made it onto Unsolved Mysteries." What? So maybe it wasn't all the fun stuff they were doing, because the camera actually caught something good enough that Unsolved Mysteries said, "Yes, we are going to use this in a segment that we're doing." So amazing. That's probably one of the more cooler interactions I've had with people, because this is the first time I've had a conversation with somebody whose evidence actually went on like national TV, especially something like Unsolved Mysteries, which I spent my entire life watching. So of course, once I get home, I have to figure out, what this is about. So I get home and I Google Unsolved Mysteries Virginia UFO sightings, and the first thing that comes up is called like the Wytheville UFO Incident. And apparently that was a huge string of sightings that happened in the late 80s and early 90s, out in the Blue Ridge area of the state. And so that is what we're going to talk about today. Did you know that a large sighting of UFOs in one area is called a flat? Now you know. So the story of the Wytheville UFO incident starts in October of 1987. It's an 80s party today. So on this day in October of 1987, Danny Gordon, the local radio journalist, started his day like every other day, hounding the local sheriff's office about any happenings that went on the day before that he could then report on the radio station. Because that would totally fly today. Well, the Sheriff Pike, decided to give Danny the tea that day. And he told him that 5 police officers had witnessed a UFO incident in the sky right outside of Wytheville at Fort Chiswell. Sheriff Pike claimed that the 5 officers had witnessed red and green lights in the sky, and a couple of them were prior military and could not recognize these lights as any sort of civilian or military planes or jets or anything like that. So they were all really stumped about what they had witnessed the other night. So Danny decided to report the story as like a fun little oddity story that he thought would just be kind of like a goof. But the response that he got from his listeners was crazy. It was massive. Like the whole town was like, they saw lights, we saw lights, we see lights all the time, dude. Calls started coming in from all over the area of local residents claiming to also see the same type of lights, or different kind of lights, or just strange things in the sky in general. The response from the local residents became so overwhelming over the next couple days that the station had to finally set up its own separate phone line for those calls. And Danny pretty much spent all his free time going over those incident reports. Going through all these incident reports, Danny started to realize that everyone was seeing something different shapes, different colors, different movements, different sounds that varied so widely that it was weird. It was just strange. Like, how come everyone's seeing something different? Like, how are there so many variations and types of different things that people were saying, but everyone was seeing something? Because of this, Wytheville kind of became like a curiosity for other news reporters. So they were starting to poke around town and trying to get interviews with local residents who had experiences, and this was just starting to not sit well with Danny, who really liked his small town and their small town life. And now all of a sudden they're kind of like the weird UFO town. I guess in the 80s it wasn't cool to be the weird UFO town. And because they were starting to become the weird UFO town in the 80s, this really made Danny want to find a rational explanation for what was going on. So him and his friend Roger decide to drive out to an area where people have been seeing the most sightings. So it was an area right outside Wytheville, and they didn't see anything there, but when they were driving back on Route 21 is when Danny caught a glimpse from something from his side view, and when he looked over out the window, like boom, there's just a huge hovering light. They pull over, get out of the car, and they watch this huge dome-shaped light with strobing lights move slowly across this field, and that huge light was then followed by a small teeny red light that went behind it. The two objects move across this field and then zoom straight up. They also claim that neither of the lights made any noise while they were flying through the sky. Unfortunately, both men were so entranced and amazed with what they were watching that they completely forgot to get any photographic evidence of it, which they apparently kicked themselves in the butt for to this day, because that's the whole reason they went out there, was to try to get evidence and explanations, and they just kind of sat there like. Amazingly enough, those two went back to the same spot the next night and were able to get pictures of some more strange lights in the sky, which is really lucky because I feel like it's just random enough to just see them once in a lifetime, let alone twice in the same area 2 nights in a row. Now Danny has these photographs and he's going to do a press conference, but the morning before the press conference happens, he gets a really weird phone call. The voice on the other end of the phone basically tells him that his investigation is upsetting the government and they might start to interfere with it. And this is pretty classic, I think, for people who investigate UFOs. They tend to start to, I don't know, I guess shake things up, or at least they did back then. It definitely seemed like they didn't like people poking around and that sort of thing, so that's That's kind of like some classic MIB shit right there. So you start poking around with these things, and Big Brother didn't really like it all that much. And people would tend to get phone calls or just visitors at their door telling them to stop. And the people who didn't stop tend to have bad things happen to them. Sometime after this press conference, Danny came home one day to find that his home had been broken into, and things had been meddled with, I guess, but nothing was taken. And so he kind of just assumed that maybe it was people looking for his photographs and evidence. In December of 1987, Danny and his family were at the local mall, as you did back then. They were out in the parking lot when they started to hear like a really big commotion start to move through the crowd of people who were also out in the parking lot. And they looked up to find a large object hovering in the sky above all these people. And then that object broke off into 4 separate smaller lights and then zoomed off into the sky. Definitely something crazy for a huge group of people like that to all experience at the same time. Danny, having already messed this kind of situation up before, now had the hindsight to pull out his camera and start taking pictures. And if you Google the Wytheville UFO Incident, you can find those pictures online. And the pictures are kind of crazy because the big deal about them was that they, even in these photos from, you know, a film camera 30 years ago, you can tell that the objects are changing shape. And that was something that was sort of different than UFO pictures that had been presented as evidence before. So these sightings in Wytheville and the surrounding area were becoming so crazy intense that people were seeing them all the time at all times of day. And the sightings still remained different, just in how they were described. One witness claimed that they were seeing what looked like planes and helicopters in the sky, but they weren't making any sound, which would be really unusual because you could hear a helicopter coming from hella far away. You know, I live in an area where there's constant helicopters, jets, commercial planes. I mean, you hear them. They are in no way quiet. So that would be really weird to see something like that and not hear them coming. There was actually a witness who lived in the downtown area of Wytheville, and they claimed to see an object with like several lights around it and one big red light in the middle of it, right there in the big populated area. But I don't know if it was just them that saw it. One of the other really unique sightings, according to MUFON actually, and they are the big UFO and investigation organization. The sighting that really stood out to them was a gigantic, like, T-shape. Like a T-shape that just, but like thick, right? Like a thick T-shape. Like a thick T-shape would just float around in the sky, right? That looks weird. We'll just do it like this. A thick T-shape like this, a UFO shape like this, would float about in the sky. But hopefully you didn't see it like this. This is a serious investigation. T-shape. That was a really bad example. I'm sorry. I'm sorry, MUFON. I am not qualified for this. So they saw a giant T-shape flying through the sky. Super weird. Apparently there was no other sightings like that at the time, and so MUFON thought it was a pretty big deal that people were seeing something like that floating through the sky. I'm so sorry. So things are just crazy at this point, and Danny decides to take it upon himself to call the Pentagon. So he calls the Pentagon and talks to the Defense Department, like one does. And according to Danny, the Pentagon told him that yes, the government does confirm the existence of UFOs, and no, we don't consider them a threat. Okay? That was it. Yes, they're real. Don't worry about it. Could you imagine what that conversation went like? Yellow. Pentagon speaking. Hey, the Pentagon. Sup? So, we're having a little thing going on. No, that's crazy. So, we are having I want to say like a lot of UFO sightings. Like I would maybe call it a frenzy. Yeah, they're called a flat, actually. Oh, a flat. Okay. Okay, so they do exist. We know that much. The things in the sky that everyone is seeing does exist. Confirmed? Yes, the government totally acknowledges the existence of UFOs. All right. Yeah. Yeah, no, they're real. They're real. No, you're not hallucinating. That's good, right? There's nothing worse than a full town hallucinating. It's happened. Yeah, see, but you know what? Everyone's kind of worried about it. Like, should we be worried about it? Are they hostile? Like, are they gonna take us into their ship and fly off with us and experimentations in unpleasant places? No. Oh, no, no, no. No, there's nothing to worry about. No, we shouldn't be worried about it. No, no, nothing to worry about. Yeah. Oh, no. They're super chill. Are they? Nah, bro, they're super chill. Okay. I, well, I have no reason to not believe you at this point in history. So okay, yeah. They exist and they're super chill. Got it. On it. All right, yeah. We'll let you know when they become not chill. All right. Y'all take it easy, all right? Okay, great. Talk to you later, Pentagon. But hey, maybe cut back on that investigating, okay? Yeah, it's not necessary. We've got it handled. All right. Later. In 1988, Danny traveled to a UFO conference that was happening in Virginia Beach, Virginia, and he got a call from a retired military intelligence officer who told him to record their conversation, first off. And this man claimed that because of his investigations into UFOs that his son died from leukemia because of it. Okay, that would be terrifying if somebody wanted you to stop your investigations that badly that they somehow gave your child leukemia. And he warned Danny that the same might happen to him or his family if he continued his research and investigations into it, because the government was apparently not happy with the attention that he was bringing to the subject, even though he just had a really chill conversation with the Pentagon. So, coincidentally, the week that he was in Virginia Beach, there was a hepatitis outbreak, but because he didn't get it while he was down there, he doesn't think it was government intervention, because otherwise they would have got him, right? A month later, Danny's chilling at home and he hears a knock on his door. And he sees two guys, and they claim to be reporters for a local newspaper. He invites them inside, and one of the men spends nearly an hour interviewing him, while the other guy walked around his house taking pictures of random things. So after the interview, they told Danny that they would hear from them soon regarding when the interview and article would come out, but of course, he never hears back from them. So after a while, Danny calls the office to this newspaper that they claim to be from, and go figure, the people in the office at the newspaper had no idea who he was talking about. The office could not confirm who those men were, and they had no record of them ever working in that newspaper office. That's some MIB shit right there. So a little bit after this, Danny decides to kind of go through his collection of UFO pictures and just his evidence and kind of just sort through it and see what he had. And he realizes that the negatives for the mall incident were gone. All the research that I did, I can't find anything saying that he ever found them. I think they disappeared into the ether for good. And he's never been able to explain how those disappeared. So after all this, Danny had an incident where he ended up collapsing, and they were really worried that maybe he had a stroke or a heart attack. It was just exhaustion from running himself ragged with stress, trying to solve this unsolvable mystery, which is why it was on Unsolved Mysteries. So after that, he decides to quit the UFO biz for good. So no more researching, no more investigations, no more UFO huntings, no more putting himself out there to be ridiculed or having strange people call him or show up at his door with ominous, threatening instances of what might happen to him if he keeps researching. No more UFO craziness. He's out. So according to one article I read, he hasn't had a UFO sighting since 1990, and he doesn't do research, although he did write a book, and the book is called Don't Look Up, which would be really good advice for anybody who does not want UFO craziness to happen to them. I guess he does still do interviews about it, because I saw a more recent interview with him on YouTube, and you can look all those up. The UFO sightings in Wytheville have calmed down over the past 30 years, I guess with the occasional sighting every now and then, but nothing like the flap that they were having back then. The flap is over. The flap has moved on. And I guess the thing with the people who were there experiencing at the time is that there's still no explanation for what the hell was happening, what they are saying, why this huge frenzy of UFOs came to their town during this short period of time. If you look up other UFO flaps throughout history, that's kind of their MO, you know? They kind of roll into town, see what's up, hang out for a little bit, everyone gets freaked out and sees them, and things get crazy, and then they just mosey on down to the next town over. They just gotta keep on keeping on. So there it is. That is the Wytheville UFO Incident, flap, whatever you want to call it. Alright, thank you for joining me for this lovely excursion into the UFO mysteries and our strange reality. We'll see you next time. It's like, they do so much more than Roswell. Why don't we talk about those things? Give them credit for other things other than a crash that happened in the 40s. That's embarrassing. Could you imagine being that alien, the Roswell alien, and you get back home and all your other alien bros are like, dude, like, all anyone ever talks about is you crashing into the desert on Earth. What about all the other cool stuff? What about the pyramids? No one wants to talk about that. No one wants to talk about the cow mutilations, the butt stuff, the crop circles. That's art, bro.